Yeah. So, yeah. So we go. So, Excellencies, delegates, dear colleagues, so welcome to this last side event that this team is proposing. There are a few others ongoing to the Regional Forum for Sustainable Development for the UNEC region, co-organized by UNEP, UNECE, and the Geneva Environment Network. In this session, we are joined by leading experts to discuss the Pact for the Future and the Declaration on Future Generations. We are all delighted to be here with you. And before I hand over to our moderator, Wendy, just our usual housekeeping rules. The documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available as usual on the webpage of this event. The transcript is available in over 100 languages, and you can use the Q&A box to ask your questions. I also want to mention the other partners of this session, which are the UN Youth Advisory Council under UNCT Azerbaijan, UNESCO Youth Climate Action Network, UNESCO ESD Youth Network, the Foundation for Environment Education, and the government of Cyprus. So with that, I also encourage you to rewatch you saw in the previous slide, the other sessions that we organized yesterday afternoon. For example, we had a very good discussion on education and biodiversity. And so with that, Wendy, I let you take over to have this session.
Thank you very much, Diana, and thank you to you all. I know for some of you rather too early, but really appreciate you joined us this morning. But also I want to urge you to keep on time. We have the formal session starting at 10 o'clock, so we all have to run back to the session. So I would urge you to stick to the time allocated to you, if possible, 6 minutes maximum. Having said that, the whole idea behind this session is we came out of a landmark event in New York, the Pact, the Summit for the Future, particularly the Pact for the Future that invested significant amount of policy related proposals in terms of how do we strengthen youth engagement, how do we invest more in youth, particularly when you look at paragraph 18 of the declaration, that really emphasized the relevance of investing more in youth. With that in mind, I would really want to hear from you how you are going to unpack this in terms of your networks and in terms of your organizations. For that, I would now start with the Foundation for Environment Education. Lee, you are connected. I see you. Yeah. So I know from this 22nd till of April till 6th of May, you have the Global Action Days dedicated to promoting biodiversity conservation. With that in mind, how do you plan to promote the outcomes of the Pact for the Future? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Olivia Copsey. I'm standing in for my colleague, Lee Ray Davis, this morning. I'm Director of Education at the Foundation for Environmental Education. And I'm here to mainly present to you a campaign that we have coming up, as you mentioned, the Global Action Days, and how we see this really as an opportunity to activate youth agency within this this strategy, looking at youth involvement and leadership in their own rights of of themselves and for future generations to a clean and healthy and sustainable environment. So next slide, please. Just a very quick background to our organisation. We are we have a well-established organisation. The Foundation for Environmental Education, or FEE, has been running for over 40 years. We have several programmes for which mainly focus on environmental education, or 5 main programmes for environmental education, and 2 on focusing on sustainability in the tourism sector. Our environmental education programs, again, are quite aged, 30 years old for eco schools and young reporters for the environment. The Learning About Ecosystems and Forests program is coming up to 25 years old this year. Eco Schools alone has 52,000 schools registered in 100 countries now. So what we aim to do with our programs is fulfill a whole of system approach for environmental education. We have eco schools in the formal education sector, learning about ecosystems and forests, fulfilling this really important area of nature connection and outdoor learning. Young Reporters for the Environment is really focusing on young leaders and the informal education sector, and in particular the capacity of youth to engage their communities. And then we have a program for higher education called the Eco Campus program. So all of this means that when we run a campaign, we're not educating into a void. We're using campaigns to activate our existing programs and networks and develop momentum around particular environmental themes and important areas of concern. So next slide, please. So the Global Action Days is our annual campaign. It's run every year. So that means our network is waiting for it. They have it factored into their annual plans. This is really important because we need to ensure there's momentum and there's a ready audience. So even with a few weeks to go, we now have almost 300,000 people registering to take part in this campaign in 115 countries. So in fact, while I said our education programs reach 100 countries, the Global Action Days even reaches beyond our own network, and that's really important. It helps us to enable our members to expand their programs to meet targets such as the Greening Education Partnership and other global targets for engagement and commitment to environmental education. Within the Global Action Days this year, our theme is ecosystem restoration. We aim for the Action Days to provide platforms for youth-led initiatives. So this just doesn't acknowledge the rights of young people to be involved, but also their leadership potential and their innovation, and what is possible when you do involve youth in environmental campaigns. All of our programs have a strong educational foundation, so that enables us to introduce new themes, new concepts, and things we feel particularly important. And these can be quite precise. For example, I'll show you in our activities this year, we're talking about things like bioeconomy, things like the role of trees and forests in climate adaptation, and therefore we can focus our educational messages to really hit home during this campaign period. The campaigns also, as I mentioned, they enable our participants already involved in our programs to engage beyond their own schools, their own communities, their hotels, wherever it is that they are engaging. And this really shows that not only have they got a strong voice, they have a strong capacity, and when as policymakers a strategy comes up and is important to communicate, these campaigns can reflect back the commitment of communities and young people to the environmental concerns that policymakers are trying to focus on, so it becomes a positive and self-fulfilling cycle. Next slide, please. Just very quickly to show you this year, the types of activities we have. In just one campaign, we can have several activities happening, and this means that different agencies, different types of formal and informal education sectors, youth can pick or choose the activities that suit them. We also, as I mentioned, we have a big network, 100 countries and beyond, and it means that whatever activities we have, they can be we can make sure there's something that can be adapted to a specific context. And I won't go through the activities we have, but I hope you'll visit the website, our FEE website, and I'll share a link so you can have a look at what these activities are, and registrations are still open. So next slide, please. Really important for us, these campaigns offer us an opportunity to develop collaborative partnerships and projects. We are very involved in several different strategies, the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, the Greening Education Partnership, and we have really strong partnerships with other organizations with like mind who have similar objectives to us. And not only for FEE are these collaborations important, but right down to the level of the schools and the youth who are involved. We're aiming for these campaigns to provide a focal point to develop local collaborations. And these are absolutely essential to build momentum for environmental efforts, and also for global commitments, for example, to rights. That we hope can create a groundswell of a movement to achieve these and show support to policymakers. Thank you, and I think this is my final slide. Thank you. Quick link, please join in the fun. Please look at our campaign as a way to help you to mobilize your own communities around environmental concerns and rights of young people to a sustainable and clean environment. Please get in touch. We are always open to collaborate with new organizations and existing partners. So thank you so much for inviting me today, and it's great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Apologies, I called you Lee. That I think I mixed up your name. Please use the action days to promote what came out of the Pact for the Future, and we hope you get back to us in terms of what has happened during those weeks. But we will also follow through. Our next speaker is Kathleen from the Good Lobby. Thank you very much for joining us. The question I have for you is, building on what came out of the Summit of the Future, common sense seems not to prevail nowadays in many ways, and it's disrupted by short-term policies, short-term interests. Now, in the spirit of looking at the interest and the needs of future generations, how do we make sure that that responsibility is maintained? Probably what is experience in terms of this area? Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I really like that you brought up the notion of common sense, because I think when you talk to anyone on the street, whether it's your colleague, whether it's a friend, no one says, we don't want to have a planet, or we hope that our children's children have a horrible life, right? Like, we all have this intrinsically linked in us to say that of course we want a better life for our children, of course we want a more sustainable planet, but we get really bogged down in the details. And so for context, the Good Lobby, we are an NGO, but we essentially help other NGOs work with especially European institutions to try to kind of crystallize this common sense, because the problem is, once you get into the policy sphere, people start thinking in this very short term election cycles. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. If you're in America, it never ends. So you end up kind of having this dissonance between what people want and what you actually need to do to achieve that. And so I think there's a really important role for activism, but I think we also place a little too much burden on youth. So I train youth activists, and we constantly hear, why do I have to save the planet? You guys messed it up. So I think that one of the things that we've worked on at the Good Lobby is we co-founded, which I will put into the resources section that you can peruse. I won't present it now, but we co-founded the Fit for Future Generations Coalition, which now has 28 members. And the whole idea is to try to have policymakers actually take the rights of future generations into consideration, which is a bit existential because we're going beyond youth. We're not necessarily just talking about youth and babies. We're talking about what does the planet look like in 100 years, which can be difficult to conceptualize, but we've made some great progress. So at a European level, we have been demanding to have a commissioner responsible for future generations. We got halfway there, I would say, because there's now a commissioner for intergenerational fairness, but this can also apply in all different types of regions, right? This is the EU context, but if you think about national context, you can also think about having legislators who are specifically responsible for this type of work. And in that way, they can kind of represent the unrepresented, the people who are not here yet, and that's their responsibility and their mandate. And then an important part of this is also sort of from an EU perspective, we can call it a fitness check, or from the EU perspective, it's a regulatory scrutiny board. But the idea is having some sort of an analysis on all types of legislation, a horizontal analysis. So you don't just go to the Future Generations Commissioner when you have a question. The idea is that it's horizontal. No matter what policy is passed, you need to have some sort of a check and some sort of a analysis of how this might impact the future. And this isn't unprecedented. There's countries like Wales who have already implemented this. And there's also implementation for things like climate. Imagine that you're presenting a project. You probably have to go through some sort of an analysis to see the impact on the environment in any different context. So the idea is that we might have this also for future generations, and there would be someone specifically responsible so that it's at a legislative level, a legal level, and it's not just up to the activists saying, hey, we want a better world. I think both can exist in tandem, but the true idea is to have a very concrete commissioner or whatever exists in your country with a mandate, with a specific horizontal mandate to review each and every law that goes forward and say, how is this going to work? And then also this would come with continuous citizen input and activist input. It's not to say we give it all to the politicians. Of course, we also work on participatory democracy, so also listening to the concerns of the younger generation, but with something that has, shall we say, a little bit more teeth. And I think that's where the UN Pact has been really useful. I mean, I think it's amazing to see the fact that future generations were even mentioned. We always talk about youth. We very rarely see future generations explicitly mentioned. So the UN Pact can be sort of a springboard to say, this is something that really has momentum, and we really want to implement this in more countries beyond the EU. I think it's really powerful. I think that's pretty much all I have to say.
Much, Kelsey. I'm glad to hear that the pact has a little bit of a teeth, and let's hope that it will continue to bite as we move forward. And we need as many institutions and networks as possible. And I'm glad that you also made an interesting suggestion in terms of this is not just about young people, but it is also about how does the planet look like in 100 years? And this is something we're literally fighting for every single day. And I hope we will continue this dialogue with you and others to make sure that this pact has a life in many countries and institutions. Now, let me move to Samia from the World Future Council. Samia, you've been involved when it comes to the rights of future generations for many years. And maybe the one question I want to ask you is basically in terms of whether or not there was this genuine, the previous speaker talks about the pact has somehow a teeth. That is nice. But I just want to know from your experience and from what you have seen as an outcome, is the process genuinely inclusive, participatory in ensuring the protection of future generations? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Bondi. Good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for inviting me to this very timely and important webinar. And I'm also happy that we are talking about the rights of future generations. I just would like to give some words about the World Future Council, because we have been a very strong advocate for future and intergenerational justice, including the rights of future generations of all living beings. And our mission has always been to ensure that long-term thinking and the rights and needs of future generations are respected and embedded in our today's decision-making processes and legal frameworks. So just back to what Kelsey also already mentioned, we have been working as a global thought leader in institutionalizing the rights of future generations, and especially in promoting guardians or ombudspersons for future generations, including at the UN level, and advocating this at every level of governance, regional, such as the EU, but also national and subnational. And we have also been and we are also now advocating for the rights of nature and the principle of earth trusteeship, because we think these are very fundamentally linked to the role of humans within the community of life, including the well-being of future generations. And just one word to the UN process and the declarations on future generations. Long before the World Future Council has campaigned at the highest level and called on the UN Secretary General to appoint an ombudsperson for future generations at the Rio +20 summit in 2012, which led to a series of high-level consultations leading up to the first policy document under our common agenda by the UN's Secretary General, which was named at that time Think and Act for the Future. So we were very heavily involved during the Summit of the Future, and also we delivered language and activism around the Declaration for Future Generations. But we explicitly advocated for the appointment of a UN Special Envoy for Future Generations with a clear mandate, and we supported language in the draft declaration already said that emphasized legal accountability, intergenerational equity, and safeguards and policy evaluation. I will skip some of my points because of the time, but I still would like to raise here what intergenerational justice really means. And means really that we must always consider the needs and rights of future generations. For example, the 7-generation principle rooted in indigenous wisdom encourage us to think about the well-being of people and nature 7 generations from now. And by definition, future generations are not here to stand up for their rights. This is why someone must do it for them. So future and intergenerational justice must be the guiding principle of all political, economic, and cultural action. Otherwise, I think the survival of our humanity and all life on Earth is in grave danger. So we are at a point towards a paradigm shift, and I think this is very good and timely and very also exciting. So let's go this way. So back to your question. In many ways, I think the process was inclusive and participatory. So at UN level, there was these UN level consultations. It included member states, UN agency, youth representatives, civil society organizations, indigenous peoples, and academic institutions. The Global Futures Forum and the Summit of the Future consultations included civil society briefings and youth dialogues, and also online platforms were also made available for open submissions to the Zero Draft. Children and youth are explicitly mentioned as critical agents of positive change, and the Pact states that we recognize that together with future generations, they will live with the consequences of our actions and inaction. So their participation was framed also through the lens of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the need for youth responsive governance. And I felt that youth advocacy was very strong and central, vocal, and visionary, and with really very concrete demands. And they have been really better advocating for let's say, the participation of children. But that's great. So the demands of youth was really youth-led citizens assemblies, ombudsperson at local and global levels, binding commitments to intergenerational impact assessments in legislation, and also education reforms that foster long-term thinking and planetary stewardship, which we totally endorse. However, if we are honest, while commendable strides were made towards inclusivity, the process fell short of fully embodying a co-creative approach that truly centers the needs and rights of future generations. Representation occurred, but power asymmetries and top-down structures remained. And the process was largely state-led and often lacked transparency, and many global self-representative and grassroots actors felt their concerns were not equally reflected, and the voices of youth and indigenous people sometimes only played an advisory or tokenistic role. And the language of the draft declaration has been criticized for being non-committal, with limited operational mechanisms for accountability or enforcement. And furthermore, there was no formal mechanism for future generations themselves, as let's say, ombudsperson or citizen assemblies to shape the draft. I remember the strong language on future generations in the first and second drafts of the Pact and the Declaration. And sadly, the final Pact for the Future version was disappointing in this regard. It fell short of our hopes for concrete and transformative action. So where do we go from here? I think now it is time to turn words into action and to get the outcomes of the declaration implemented. I will not mention major points, but last week the Secretary General gave an update on the implementation of the Pact for the Future, and he stressed again the key role young people play in shaping the Pact's priorities. So there is now progress towards establishing a youth investment platform to ensure that national funding mechanism and investment platforms are focused on the needs of young people. And regarding generations yet to be born, a strategic foresight network and community of practice has been established to ensure that policy programs and field operations are based on long-term thinking. And finally, this is what makes us very happy, a special envoy for future generations will be appointed later this year. So we at the World Future Council are ready to take the next steps to raise this paradigm shift, and looking forward to you, everybody, so that let's go this way and let's join these efforts. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Samia. So we'll take on many of the comments you shared with us. UNEP will be organizing actually its assembly at the end of this year, entitled Advancing Sustainable Solutions for a Resilient Planet. In conjunction with that, there will be a global youth assembly. So some of the ideas you shared with us, I think that it would make a lot of sense also to be shared during that assembly. So we will stay in touch with you and see how we can also further partner in terms of further unpacking that what the Pact, the future is all about for both for future generations, but also for the planet itself. Thank you so much. And now, having said that, I'll move to our next speaker. Unfortunately, the chair of our Education for Sustainable Development for the UNECE region could not join us, but we are joined by Nona, who is leading the ESD work with the UNECE, to speak a little bit about an event organized in the margins of the Summit of the Future, together with a number of partners. Nona, over to you.
Yes, good morning, dear colleagues. My name is Nona Ilukina, and I'm working at the Secretariat of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, Strategy for Education for Sustainable Development. Our Secretariat assists implementation of activities of the UNECE Steering Committee on ESD, which is composed of the government representatives of the UNECE region, who work on the implementation of the strategy for Education for Sustainable Development. I'm delighted to be part of this side event, which is closely aligned with the tasks and priorities of the UNEC Steering Committee on ESD, which is focused among others on entrepreneurship, innovation, and green skills. And today I'm here speaking on behalf of the chair of the UNEC Steering Committee on ESD, Dr. Arabella Zahariu, who is at the same time the expert from Cyprus and the government representative to the committee, UNEC Committee on ESD. And she unfortunately couldn't make it today because she is currently still traveling to Geneva. So, dear colleagues, Dr. Zahariu wanted to share how Cyprus is helping turn the Pact of the future into real transformative action, especially through our collaboration with UNEP on green jobs and education. So in June last year, Cyprus hosted the UNEC Forum, the first in its type, UNEC Regional Forum on ESD in Limassol, which was focused on youth entrepreneurship. That event brought together over 50 countries and numerous NGOs and other civil and private and academia organizations, and it served as a catalyst for a groundbreaking international initiative, the Green Jobs and Skills Assessment Project, developed in partnership with Cyprus and UNEP. So at the Summit of the Future, which was organized in New York later last year in September, Cyprus and UNEP co-convened a high-level side event titled Empowering Youth for Sustainable Futures, Intergenerational Responsibility and Skills for a Just Transition. So this event reinforced the message from Limassol Forum that education for sustainable development must be central to our efforts to build a just, inclusive, and climate-resilient future. A crucial driving force behind these developments is the UNEC Steering Committee on ESD, which Cyprus is currently chairing. The Steering Committee plays a pivotal role in aligning regional education policies with the global climate and sustainability goals. The committee's emphasis on youth innovation and entrepreneurship has directly shaped the priorities of the Green Jobs and Skills Assessment Project, making it a blueprint for regional collaboration under the Green Pact. So allow me to highlight on behalf of Dr. Zahariu the main findings of the high-level event, which was held in New York. The event recognized that young people must be central in shaping and leading the transition to sustainable societies. A key theme was the importance of fairness across generations, ensuring that today's decisions do not compromise the prospects of future generations. This principle is now embedded in the broader Pact for the Future, especially through the Declaration on Future Generations. Dr. Zahariu, representing Cyprus, shared best practices and policy models from Cyprus' national ESD strategy at that side event. She highlighting its holistic and systemic approach to embedding sustainability in education and youth empowerment. The event served as a platform for announcing new commitments to the Green Jobs for Youth Pact, led by UNEP, ILO, and UNICEF. These commitments aim to create 1 million new green jobs for youth and support 10,000 youth-led green enterprises by 2030. Participants emphasized that nearly every job is about to change, and education must prepare young people accordingly. Several speakers, including representatives from UNEP, ILO, UNICEF, and LinkedIn, called for systemic reforms in national education policies, in vocational training systems, and in labor market frameworks. There was broad agreement that green jobs and skills must be mainstreamed, not treated as niche. Education was framed not only as a means of skills building, but as a driver of innovation, entrepreneurship, and empowerment. Key takeaways from that side event included the need to shift from knowledge-based to competence-based education, encouraging interdisciplinary learning and problem solving, integrating ESD in formal, non-formal, and informal education systems. The event reinforced that building a sustainable future requires collaboration across governments, youth organizations, private sector, civil society, and multilateral agencies. Cyprus' joint initiative with UNEP was recognized as a regional model of this type of multi-stakeholder collaboration. Education for green jobs will feed into regional and global policy reviews, including the high-level political forum and SDG targets, especially SDG 4 and SDG 8. On decent work, and 4 is on education, obviously. On behalf of Dr. Zahariu, I would like to emphasize that our collaboration with UNEP is not symbolic, it is systemic. It is about building partnerships that reshape education, support the green economy, and offer great pathways, real pathways for young people into decent future-oriented work. In closing, let me say this: if we want a green future, we need green learning, green leadership, and green livelihoods. Cyprus is proud, this is the message of Dr. Arvela Zahariu. Cyprus is proud to be leading this effort in partnership with UNEP, UNEC Steering Committee on ESD, and many others. And we invite you to join us in scaling this work and delivering the future young people really deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nona. And we sincerely hope and also look forward to integrating some of the outcomes of the Pact the Future into the work of the UNECE Steering Committee on Education for Sustainable Development. And we look forward to working with you and other partners. Now, having said that, I move to a youth representative, Ms. Zora Abilova, who is a member of the UN Advisory Council in Azerbaijan. And the question I have for you is, Zora, how are you within the Youth Council injecting the notion of protecting the needs of future generations? That is one. And the second one is, what help or assistance do you need from the UN system in terms of advancing this agenda at the national level? Over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm Zohra Abilova. I'm currently a member of UN Youth Advisory Council and I'm studying law at the same time. Thanks for invitation. First of all, I would like to answer the first question. So as a youth council, as a youth council, we can take some concrete steps towards the implementation of the Pact for the Futures and on the generations. Excuse me, could you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I would like to suggest that organizing some awareness campaigns on behalf of the UN Youth Advisory Council for public, especially for youth, would be excellent in terms of to raising awareness, because as a youth, we are the next generation and we are the majority that's influenced by all the political and other decisions made by the government. In terms of climate change, and this also influence on us, and that's why raising awareness, I would say, number one contribution. And I would like to suggest also supporting local projects that are not really financed by organizations or even not supported by the government themselves. So UN Youth Advisory Council can also assist these types of projects. to support the youth engagement in both environmental context and decision-making process. I actually would like to give some examples that us, me and other members of the UN Youth Advisory Council contributed to. For example, there was the UN Azerbaijan Sustainable Development Corporation framework, and it covered 4 years of some implementation in terms of achieving 2030 goals. And as a UN Youth Advisory Council, we were invited, and we participated in the discussions, and in terms of observing how they implement these goals actually. And the another one, I would say, collaboration with other NGOs or organizations. For example, collaboration with Conference of the Youth. This is financed, I would say, if I'm not mistaken, it's financed by UNICEF. It's also called Youth Climate Invoice. So Youth Climate Invoice and UN Youth Advisory Council, if they collaborate together, I think they would make even more impact. Sorry, my connection. Oh, okay. And we actually, as a UN Youth Advisory Council, we expect some also assistance from our UN team. I mean, in a national level. The number first assistance would be financial assessment, and because there are some projects that we would like to initiate, but because of lack of some budget, we cannot. And second, finding some expertise on the field, because we believe that UN team has very big access to international organizations, and also organizations that are working in other countries as well. So finding expertise and financial assistance would be a lot of contributions, a lot of competitions. And I would say policy decision making is very important step, and youth tend not to participate in this kind of policy making, decisions making process. So maybe UN national UN team can also assist with members of UN Youth Advisory Council to participate in this kind of decision-making process. Also can influence on lawmakers in order to draft, in order to have some contribution in the drafting of legislations, for example. Yes, that's all my contributions to this session.
Thank you very much, Zora. So the one thing I can encourage you is continue to be engaged in the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. It has a lot in terms of
Yes.
climate, biodiversity, but also youth engagement. If you need any guidance, assistance from our side, we are more than happy to help you in any way we can. Thank you very much. Now I move to our next speaker. Simon is the UNECE Youth ESD Youth Advisor, but leads a lot of interesting work in terms of ESD, but he also has a background in public health. So the question, Simon, I wanted to ask you is, in the context of lessons we have learned from COVID-19, it really exposed our vulnerability in terms of whether we are prepared or not. And that brings me to the question of also, again, in future generations, whether or not the lessons we have learned from COVID, whether or not that can be linked to how we can protect the needs and aspirations of future generations. In 5 minutes, if you can. Over to you.
Thank you, Wandy, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So thinking a little bit about the COVID-19 epidemic and what it exposed, I was thinking earlier today that it's a little bit like if COVID were our Titanic, we failed miserably. And we're still failing. And that's kind of the issue. Basically, what our solution is for the gigantic iceberg, which we know is there, which we know is not going to move, is to burn it down. And that's not changing no matter what we do. So we humans are fantastic at thinking from the top down. We've had the Millennium Development Goals, we have the SDGs, now we have the Pact for the Future. And basically what we're just doing is we're throwing buckets of water onto the ice saying, will this melt? And essentially that's not really working. And I think part of the problem is really the way a lot of these systems work. And it was mentioned by some of the previous speakers, which mentioned a lot of how the Declaration on Future Generations and the Pact for the Future really still highlights the asymmetries that remain. The process was a very top-down process. It was government-led. There was not a lot of bottom-up approach. And for actually the solutions, we've been advocating for them for a very long period of time. But what we really, really need to do is to listen and work with the people we want to work for. So if our current young generations can't work towards future young generations, it's not really going to solve anything. So what could we do? One, empower youth. A phrase I know one day you like as well is show me where the money is and I'll show you what your priorities are. Currently, priorities are industrialization, defense and security, and apparently now also tearing down world order, because we've decided that international solidarity is no longer a priority. All governments worldwide are really focusing on our own national sovereignty. And when we're thinking about future generations and we're thinking as Europeans, we should also be thinking as Africans, we should be thinking as Americans, as Asians. Why? Because anything that happens in our context will affect those in other contexts. So what do we need to do for them? We also need to think long term, which means anything that I do in my region should affect other people in other regions, and investments there will help me, because that's something also very important. In this respect, we should invest in resilience. In public health, when we think about resilience in the health system, what we generally think is how we react to shocks. And basically, our reaction to the last shock, big shock we had, which was the COVID-19 system, is we're just going to keep doing everything the same. Not a lot has changed in the health systems. Not a lot has changed in global order. And this is something that is quite important. A solution, again, intergenerational solidarity. Older people, so those who are no longer able to work, depend on younger people to live fulfilling lives. So therefore, if we don't give them the tools, and now I start including myself, because I will already have to work longer, and then probably the next generation will have to work longer. If I don't give them the tools to actually live long, fulfilling lives, what are we really working for? And to do this, in the end, what we really need, and it's also something that one of our previous speakers mentioned, was we need to ensure accountability. So we need to make sure that actually all these documents that we're making, all the time and money that is being spent, actually makes people accountable for the actions they take, which means governments, maybe not the current ones, but future ones, take the actions that were taken into account today as accountable for the responsibilities that they have from the agreements that we have. Because we have many, many, many agreements, we have many pacts, we have many goals, but in the end, what we really lack is this accountability to say, you know, we know what the iceberg is, we know where it is. The solution is not to steer straight at it and say it's probably going to solve itself. What we really need to think already is, okay, how can we veer off course and look for actual solutions? So those are my 2 pennies for your thoughts.
Thank you very much. I like your two pennies, and that then nicely connects to our next speaker, Sebastian, from the Center for International Environmental Law. Good to see you, Sebastian. And basically the question I have, it touches a little bit what Simon has said. You know, declarations, pacts, you know, sometimes they, or many times they remain symbolic. But for something like this, this is about protecting the needs of future generations, but also the planet. I really like today, I picked up something is, it's not just about young people, but it's about this planet in 100 years. How does it look like? So what are the legal or political mechanisms that can be employed to ensure that the rights of future generations are protected? Over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you very much, and I concur. Like, it's a very good transition with the previous speaker. I address you today with impatient optimism, and I'm very grateful for the invitation and for the interventions by other panelists, really recognizing the work that many of them have done over the past many years, actually to get us where we are. The urgency behind my intervention is really reflected on the fact that we speak about intergenerational equity, the importance of future generation at the core of sustainable development, and have been discussing this for decades, yet the triple planetary crisis accelerates and we do not see sufficient enforcement, sufficient impacts on decision-making in practice. And very often what we see is the principle of intergenerational equity being treated as a tier 2 slogan or principle that actually does not really shape policymaking. And for sure, in that context, it was great to see the UN dedicate a summit to future generation, or like placing future generation at the core of Summit of the Future last year, and to see the adoption of a declaration focused on future generation. But it was also extremely frustrating to see that in 2024, this declaration actually does lack teeth. And from the perspective of a legal organization for us, really teeth mean two different dimensions. The first one are institutional tools that really ensure effective implementation. Many have already spoken to this, and building on legal standards, including the recognition of states' obligation with regard to the respect of human rights. We have many institutions that help us actually protect human rights. And so this is clearly something that we regret from the declaration adopted last year, is the absence of references to the rights of future generation. And I'll come back to that. At the same time, we've seen that actually, even when the UN in New York struggles to make sufficient progress, we have seen a lot of developments recently. On the institutional fronts, there's been the experience of a few countries, Wales, Hungary, for instance, where particular institutions were established to really champion, relay the voices, the perspectives, the needs, the rights of future generations in decision-making, and ensure that these concerns are not systematically discarded when it comes to actually making trade-offs and balancing different interests. Those are encouraging examples. At the same time, when we always refer to the same one or two countries in a region as broad as Europe, it demonstrates the fact that we really need to build on those precedents. Some of the other organizations on this panel have worked very hard actually to make sure that we can capture the good practices, the lessons learned from those experiences. And we really need to accelerate to make sure that future generations are given voices more effectively in decision making. We are very encouraged to see some progress. At the UN, the announcement that was mentioned by several already earlier last week by the UN Secretary General of the upcoming appointment of a special envoy on future generation. We've been asking this together with partners for over a decade. Wendy and us and I know each other from the Rio +20 summit, where this was one of the core demands from civil society. And so it's great to see that despite the lack of sufficient progress content in the declaration, the UN Secretary General decided to just roll up his own sleeves and actually to drive change, institutional change. And so it demonstrates also the power that individuals that are in position of decision-making can have to really bring forth the change that we need to see. At the European level, to come closer to the region that we are discussing today, the appointment of the EU Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness is definitely something that is very interesting, but we need to see to what extent this is really actually driving decisions at the European Commission. The adoption by the Council of Europe, an institution that is very important for the protection of the rights, of environmental rights across Europe, of an environmental strategy that actually mentions many times the importance of protecting the rights of future generations, is also an encouraging development. The second aspect for us from the perspective of a legal organization working on these issues is the need to really stop discussing future generation and intergenerational justice just from the perspective of interest, but to anchor our work in the legal obligations that states already have with regard to the protection of the rights of present and future generations. There is nothing in human rights law that actually suggests that we should be able to discriminate between present and future generations. On the contrary, human rights law is actually anchored on the principles of non-discrimination. Yet we see too rarely the consideration of the rights of future generations in human rights related decision processes and accountability mechanisms. And so this is something that we are very excited to be working with many partners. I will mention a resource that was published a couple of years ago. I pasted the link in the chat. It's the Maastricht Principles on the Human Rights of Future Generations, to really highlight, as the previous speakers have mentioned, we have sufficient amount of pacts already. What we need now is to focus on implementation and upholding legal obligations that already exist. There are court cases across the region and beyond that demonstrate the power of considering and protecting the rights of future generations. For instance, by the Federal Constitutional Court of Germany in the Neubauer versus Germany case, where the Federal Court actually recognized that insufficient climate action harms the rights of future generations. And so I'll just conclude here, maybe to leave time for questions, but to really stress the fact that what we need now to see is respect of legal standards and obligations, enforcement mechanisms, and I think that's a great repetition of the message that many of the panelists have already highlighted.
Thank you very much, Seb. That is very useful. I know we only have 3 minutes left. So the only thing I can say, because we're about to start the main event in a few meters away from here. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you for making time. Some of you way too early to wake up, but we really appreciate for making time to be part of this. The second one is, as I said, we are preparing for our big assembly at the end of the year, and considering the Pact for the Future is still fresh in our minds, we will reach out to you again how you can also help us in terms of shaping the discussion, and especially when it comes to the youth assembly. But also more than anything is how can we work together in terms of common sense to prevail in everything that we do, because that is one of the biggest challenges that we have today. And how do we make sure that somebody I think mentioned the Pact has a teeth, and let's make sure that that teeth continues to be shining, so that we do protect the interest of current and future generations, but as well as protect the only planet that's livable to us. So thank you so much, and also thank you so much to the Gen team for doing this. So we will get back to you with additional, whether it is requests or information, things you have provided. Some of it is being posted in the chat, but I think we need to do a second chapter of this. This is just the beginning, but we will do something together in the near future. Thank you very much. Diana, would you like to say anything, or?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining and for the great inputs that everybody brought today.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. We'll stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
This was nice. And unfortunately,